ለመማር ወደ ትምህርት ተቋም መሄድ ግድ አይደለም።
ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ
ራሳችሁን ከኮሮና ቫይረስ ወረርሽኝ እየጠበቃችሁ በቤታችሁ ወይም በተመቻችሁ ቦታ
በኢንተርኔት አማካኝነት በኦንላይን ትምህርታችሁን መከታተል ይቻላል።
ካናዳ ከሚገኘው ኢንተርናሽናል ኤር ትራንስፖርት አሶሲዬሽን አያታና
ከእንግሊዙ ኢንስቲትዩት ኦፍ ኮመርሻል ማኔጅመንት ICM ጋር በመተባበር የሚሰጡ ትምህርቶችን ተከታትላችሁ በ6 ወር ጊዜ በዓለም አቀፍ ደረጃ ተቀባይነት ያለውን የስልጠና ማስረጃ ባለቤት መሆን ይቻላል።
ከኢትዮጵያ ሲቪል አቪዬሽን ባለስልጣን ሙሉ ዕውቅና ባገኘንባቸው የፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን እና የሆስተስ ስልጠናም በምዝገባ ላይ ነን።
ጥያቄና መልስ፣ የክፍል ስራዎች ብሎም ፈተና መፈተን ክፍል ውስጥ እንዳላችሁ አይነት
ልምድ ባላቸው መምህራን እየተማራችሁ
በኦንላይን ባላችሁበት ቦታ
አድራሻ ከ22 ማዞሪያ ወደ ሾላ ገበያ በሚወስደው መንገድ 150 ሜትር ገባ ብሎ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ
የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ
ህልሞን እውን ያደርጋል።
እሺ እንደምን ዋላችሁ። የዛሬው ክላስ ቻፕተር 6 ዴታ ፕሮሰሲንግ እና አናሊሲስ የሚል ርዕስ ነው። በዋናነት ቻፕተር mainly will focus on how to process data using either spaces or stata, and then how to undertake analysis. That was the main focus of this chapter. Basically, the lecture is just planned to highlight mainly related to these issues. First part is it will particularly lead to provide discussions on data processing and then management. That was the first part. Then subsequently, we will also going to discuss certain issues related to layout. Then the last part will also be touching the discussions on analysis part. Then to this end, the second part of these discussions entirely devote for providing illustrations on techniques of the data analysis. And then this part, I will highlight certain specific techniques starting from simple descriptive statistics to inferential statistical methods. Then, as usual, I will also give you some maybe exercises just to initiate you to read more on this chapter. Then first part of lecture on processing and analysis of data, which is how to undertake data processing management. So far, in the previous chapter, as you already just noted, we have been discussing different aspects on research methodology. First part is how to undertake research design. That was duly explained in the previous chapter. Plus, we also discuss how to collect data. Now, this chapter, after actually having the primary or secondary data, and then the ultimate purpose of this chapter is just how to process those collected data. And to this end, what are the main tasks of processing data, and then what is its also management in research? How to also just process the primary data, the first part. When that the researchers start processing data is also the first part. That was the first part. Immediately, when do you actually start to process your data, be it primary or secondary data? What are the considerations that you should make in processing data and management? That was also the point that we're going to discuss on this part. And then one thing that I have to actually explain at the beginning, this chapter actually assumes as if you have already just an understanding about an exposure about these softwares, Stata or spaces softwares. That was actually the intentions. The problem is just to cover those aspects by including those statistical softwares, and this class might be quite difficult to credit our class. And because of that, based on the discussions that we had last time to the previous batch as well with the respective maybe deans and the department heads, we are actually planning to provide a short-term training on these softwares separately. That will be given otherwise, understanding about this data processing management will not be actually. It must also be just complemented by the softwares. That was the point. And then with this remark, let's first parties discussion primarily what are the expected on the part of researchers to undertake data processing and management. What are the activities that is just included? Basically, the data processing management, particularly in spaces or startup, in any software, will start from variable definition. You have to actually properly define your variables to the respective softwares. That was the first steps. And then subsequently, the second step is you also need to insert data based on the definitions. You already just noted the definition for computer or the computer will recognize all command with syntax of number 1 or 2. And then you have to actually first provide corresponding definitions of your own word with computer by number. That was the first step, and we refer this one as data definition or variable definitions. You also need to define your variables into these softwares. Subsequently, you also need to edit before. While you're actually defining, you might make certain specific mistakes, and then while you also providing code, you might make certain mistakes. In this regard, you also need to edit the data. That was also the case. Then subsequently, you will need to, you are just requiring to insert these raw data into these softwares. And then the subsequent third parties, data entry and undertaking data analysis. That was the point. And then just to, for your actually quick memory, it might be better to have to complement this with software's training, but the problem is the course itself is just allocated with a block program, and then that was actually quite difficult. And then therefore, I will also just elaborate each of these specific 4 data processing and management parts. Variable definition is just providing a specific code for the questionnaire while you just inputting these questionnaires data into the computers. And then providing code might be made on Spaces software. This is the most widely applicable softwares on the part of social science field, and then primarily helps for actually defining questionnaires and inserting raw data. And then the Stata is also quite advanced statistical softwares that will help you to undertake a number of analysis. Therefore, the first part that you need to consider in this part, particularly in data processing and management part, it is the highest possible data need to be actually inserted. That must be actually assured. And then for this, you also need to provide proper data definitions. For instance, the variable, let's say the first question is sex. And the first one you will assign for male, 2 you will assign for female. And then make sure that while you actually inserting raw data on these computers, the number 2 represent female, the number 1 represent male, and the proper data definitions and then proper data entry might need to be just assured. And then one thing you also need to know in this part, first, before actually defining the questionnaire, you also need to identify the type of response format. The question is just how the question is just raised, because each response has its own data definition techniques. Like for instance, it might be open-ended, it might be closed-ended, it might be dichotomous, it might be multiple choice, it might be scale response question. And then each of these 5 specific question format has their own specific procedures for defining this on softwares. Therefore, you also the first step is just you need to actually, the first steps for ensuring proper accuracy of data definitions in species or strata is first, particularly, you need to understand how the question is just raised. Based on our earlier discussions, we do have different types of questions, and then all of the questions might boil down to either of these specific question format, and then each question format has its own techniques for defining on these softwares. Therefore, the first steps in this variable definition is just you need to just identify the response format. Then subsequently, the software will also request you to identify the scale. Scale characteristics is also need to be just distinguished, for which we'll discuss in this class. And the scale characteristics and level of measurement of variables, that is technical issues, and then that must also be just properly understood by you. And then the second steps on data processing and management is you also need to, once you just define variables on these softwares, you need to also include data cleaning. That was particularly, you must make sure that proper data with proper variables is just inserted on the computer. You also need to ensure the proper coding, and then you also need to provide proper description for the response to these softwares. That was actually to mean labeling responses, just explaining, elaborating in detail what is already on the question. The questionnaires to these softwares need to also be just assured. And then you also need to also check the data verifications. If the data is just properly, as per the definition, is just inserted on this software, is also need to be assured. That was also what we call this data editing. And then you also need to provide proper measurement scale. And then, in fact, we have about different measurement scale. Therefore, while you actually editing the data, you also need to check whether the variables are specifically properly as per proper measurement scales were inserted or not. You have to also check those. These issues are referred as data editing. And then if you actually fail to do so, the problem is it is not possible to undertake proper analysis. That was the case. And then the third step is data entry. Once, if data editing is just completed, you also need to actually insert the collected data into the computer. And then these relevant software species and strata must also be just known by graduate students at this level. You have to actually properly understand how to use these specific softwares as well. And then one thing you also need to note, the highest possible level of accuracy must be just maintained. Otherwise, as you know, the computer is just the computer language, which is what is already just garbage in is garbage out. That means if you fail to properly insert proper data, and then what is already just the output might not be actually relevant. And therefore, highest level of data accuracy must also be just maintained while you actually digitizing the data into these softwares. And one way of just assuring this highest level of accuracy is what we call double index. Double entry technique is just simply after inserting the code on this software, you have to actually cross-check and back your questionnaires, whether it is properly, the inserted data is just as per it's the code. You have to actually check, there is check and balance. In fact, softwares have their own specific techniques for checking and for detecting whether the data is just accurately inserted as per the code defined or not. There is a technique, but double entry is just the case. Double entry is just you need, after inserting the data, so you have to check once and then observe the code, and then whether the code is properly the same, it just inserted in the computer. That was third steps in data processing. And then whatever the case, in addition to these double entry techniques for maintaining accuracy of data entry, you also need to check certain common data problems, and be it advanced, maybe experienced researcher, be it average researcher, and then most of them, they actually face the following common problems. And then, in addition to this, in order to maintain highest accuracy of data entry, you also need to check these specific issues. First one is code verifications. Even after completing the questionnaire, and then after just inserting all the data in computer, you have to check and balance each specific question items, each question. That was actually the case. In fact, code verifications could also be just carried out using the software automatically, and then the software is actually detecting these specific issues. The software automatically will detect if you actually insert a code, certain non-defined code on your data, and then the computer automatically will actually identify, so that you will trim out from the data entry box. And then the out of range values is also the case. That was most common, particularly when you are just inserting data. You need to give highest, maybe highest possible, efficiency, and then in between you might insert maybe out of range data. An example for this out of range values, for instance, while inserting the age of individual, let's say is 80, and then you simply just add 10 and then you will insert 800. Imagine it's not possible to insert to have an age of household of 800. That means because of simply adding reluctantly the code or the code, the numbers, you might actually add one digits. That was also the case. In some of the case, missing data is most common problem. Particularly, this is most trivial in data analysis. Missing data or missing variables might be the case. That means in some of the case, the total questionnaires will not be responded to you. That is very good. You will replace it. But the problem is some of the respondents, they just started, and then in between they will jump. Some of the issue because of different reasons. Or some of the this kind of missing data might be actually quite common if you just if you actually assign somebody to collect data on behalf, and then the data might be collected, but the problem is it will have a number of missing variables. Missing variables might be quite common. For instance, if you actually drop the questionnaires in certain one specific manager office, and then the managers might simply just assign his secretary or the messengers on behalf to feed the questionnaires, and then some of the questions might be clear for her, and some of them might be actually totally jumped. And this kind of problem would also be just detected. And incorrect formatting is also another that was particularly common in this data analysis. Incorrect formatting, that means simply, let's say for instance, we are actually expected to insert data of sex by 1, 2, then 1 and 2, then we expect the data must be actually inserted either 1 or 2. But if you, for instance, insert 80, this is incorrect formatting, yes, out of range formatting. That was the case, yes. Some of you are also drawing graph, what? And then the fourth step is just the task. That task is related to data processing, is just undertaking analysis. Once after performing and completing all this, you also need to undertake analysis. And then particularly, data analysis might need a very solid understanding about basic statistical theories. You have to know the 10 basic issues. For instance, how to use simple measure of central tendencies. When we use mean, median, mode, when to use measure of variations, standard deviations, maybe variance, coefficient of variations, and then kurtosis, and then what are the specific purpose. And you have to actually know certain basic issues of statistical theories in order to undertake analysis. That was the case, yes? Therefore, the data analysis will not be actually carried out from blue. You have to actually have certain basic theories, particularly which type of statistical techniques might be used for undertaking maybe simple correlation to test the relation between variables. How to actually interpret the result of correlation result, simple correlation, simple correlation result. How to actually use different types of tables, the different types of tables, graphs and percentage, and then might be also be, there are different specific options that you will actually have within these softwares, and then each of these specific statistical simple descriptive statistical techniques needs a 10 understanding about statistical theories. Above all, you also need to apply the 10 advanced statistical or econometric techniques. You might also, in some of the cases, some of the research might be carried out by undertaking advanced statistical techniques. In such case, you also need to know certain basic issues. For instance, how to use the econometrics model, because your research objectives might actually require to use certain simple linear regression models. And in such case, you also need to know the basic theory, how to also just interpret, and then how to also, what are the specific procedures that need to be carried out to use the multiple linear regression models need to also be just understood. That means data analysis in general is also needs certain required theories behind that specific methods. The basic part is actually the statistical theories need to also be just revised. And then I'm sure you also going to read the basic statistical theories for your quick memory, and then try to also do that one. And then the other main issue is, when does the researcher start processing data? When does the researcher start processing data? That was actually when the researcher will start the previous specific 4 steps. And we actually expect the researchers to carry out data processing. It will actually be started immediately or after the field data collection is just completed. Once you have completed your field data collections, and then it must be actually started the soonest. Or it is also quite advisable to start data processing, that was data defining variable, editing, and then entry, and then undertaking analysis might also goes during those specific data collection process. And then data processing management might also need to contribute. Improving data quality is also need to be just assured. That was the case. And then in order to have proper quality data, you also need to know the measurement scale. And then particularly our subsequent discussions will actually highlight an issue of these measurement scales. And then these are almost related. It is a part of data processing in the management part. That was in data definitions. You have to provide a proper measurement scale for each variables. And then that was actually the case. Therefore, how do we actually provide specifically a measurement scale to our research? What is a measurement scale in general in research? How do we also use this measurement scale in research? And in fact, what are the different measurement scales of research? That was the case, yes? And basically, the measurement scale is simply you will assign specific properties, attributes, and so that these attributes might also represent specific properties of the object that was actually truthfully representing the specific properties of the numbers. That means the computer will understand everything by number. That was the case. And then that means you have to actually give proper number in place of rather than giving name. Like for instance, sex, it is either we know male or female. And then male might be 1, let's say, female 2. And then while you are actually inserting 2, and then you have to also just the same understanding must be also just maintained on the part of computers, as if the number is name, sex. That was the case. Otherwise, the computer will simply recognize, as we know, 2 is greater than 1. And then if 1 is assigned for male, 2 is assigned for female, and female is greater than, the computer will automatically understand as if numerical characteristics numbers to computer. That was the case. Therefore, there are specifically that you must understand 3 different specific scales of measurement. Then the first one is what we call nominal scale. The second one is ordinal scale. The third one is scale. And within this scale, there are 2 specific types of scale of measurement: interval scale of measurement, ratio scale of measurement. And then without knowing the attributes and the properties of each measurement scale for each variables, it's not possible to define on the computers. Therefore, you also need to identify. And then I will actually briefly explain what are nominal scale, let's say, nominal ordinal scale, and then the third, which is scale, either it might be interval or ratio scale. One thing in terms of property, a scale, it will actually undertake numerical analysis, whereas nominal and ordinal will not actually undertake numerical analysis. You will simply, that was the case. And then I will actually highlight these scales, measurement scales briefly. The nominal scale is actually the variables that is actually supposed to be assigned by nominal scale need to possess, will not possess mathematical meaning. It's not possible. If you assign nominal scale, then that is actually the case in which it's not possible to use those data to undertake mathematical properties. For instance, based on my previous example, sex might be nominal data. How? Sex might be 1 male, 2 female. That was actually the code. And then this is nominal data. This is because we don't need actually the mathematical meaning of 2. 2 is, we know, greater than 1. And if you actually assign this as if it is scale, the computer will simply undertake analysis, mathematical analysis. It will undertake maybe addition, subtraction, division, manipulation, multiplications. That was, the computer will apply mathematical operations, the basic mathematical operations. Therefore, particularly those variables, particularly that will not have any specific mathematical operation, meaning in terms of category, these are almost categorical variables, need to be assigned by nominal data. And if you actually properly give nominal data, the computer will not possess mathematical properties. That was the case. And then a good example of this type of nominal data, for instance, this kind of questions might be assigned as if nominal to the computer. What is your gender? Male or female? What is your religion? And then the first one is Muslim, Orthodox, Protestants, Catholic, and other. These are categorical. Yes? We don't need specific numbers. Rather, we are actually quite interested to calculate how much total number of individuals are Muslim, how much total number of respondents are Orthodox, Protestant. We are actually quite requiring the total number of respondents. We don't need actually to calculate maybe, for instance, this is 1, 2, 3, 4. And then if the mathematical meaning is just applying, now 4 is assigned for Catholic, and then 5 is for others. And others might be greater than others. Others might be greater than maybe Catholic, Protestant, or this kind of mathematical wrong mathematical meaning will not be processed if you assign for such categorical variables as if it is nominal scale of measurement. Nominal scale of measurement, it is simply explaining the attributes of variables and then for which it will not possess mathematical properties. And the second type of measurement scale is ordinal scale of measurement. The ordinal scale of measurement are, this one is also the case, but it is almost similar with the previous case, but this ordinal scale of measurement is actually quite similar with the previous nominal scale. It doesn't possess mathematical property. Both ordinal scale as well as nominal scale will not possess mathematical properties, but ordinal scale, somewhat, the categories have their own specific meaning. There is actually ordering. And then look, for instance, an example of this one. How is your satisfaction with customer service of the staff? And in fact, we actually refer this one or maybe scale response question is kind of this one, scale response questions. And then excellent, bad, good, bad, very bad. Now, if you actually opt excellent, and then you will give a credit from 4. That means if you select excellent, and then one thing, the customer, the individual is quite satisfied with service. That is, the out of 4, we just give 4, and then good out of 4, 3, bad out of 4, 2, very bad out of 4, 1. That was the case. Therefore, this measurement scale is actually if you have a kind of ordinal response, you will simply assign ordinal scale. But the similarity between ordinal scale and the nominal scale is both of them, they will not possess mathematical properties. Both of them will also be just applied for categorical variable, but the nominal, as opposed to the nominal, the ordinal will actually involve certain ordering. Usually, we apply this ordinal scale measurement for Likert scale equation, which is mostly raised in this MBA program. The interval scale measurement is also then the third types of scale is measurement scale is scale. The scale could be either interval or it might also be ratio. You'll find this scale or interval or ratio together as if it is the same scale on the spaces. Interval scale is a measurement primarily it will apply mathematical properties, but the interval scale will not possess true 0 point of mathematics. That means, as we know in mathematics, if we assign 0, and then it means the value will not have it will not have any it means null in mathematics. Yes, for instance, you might simply measure or a certain specific weight, and then if you have zero weight, that means it is null. But like for instance, certain specific measurement, they will not also apply this 0 as true 0 point. For instance, let's say how much is now the time. Then time is just simply 6, let's say 600, and then 00 means it doesn't mean the true 0 point in the now. It doesn't actually mean it is null. Yes, that means time moves along continuous measurement, and then each minute, second has its own meaning, and 0 within this 0 second, 0 minutes will also have its own meaning. Yes, and it will not have implying proper mathematical null meaning. Let's say, for instance, temperature 0 degree. The temperature is 0 degree Fahrenheit in terms of scale. Does it mean necessarily there is no temperature because of 0 degree Fahrenheit? And the 0 does not particularly imply the true mathematical meaning. That means this interval scale of measurement might be applied mathematical operation plus this interval scale of measurement will not possess proper 0 mathematical meaning. For such variables, for instance, if you have variable of temperatures, you need to assign interval. If you have a variable of temperature on your data, you also need to assign interval. The last measurement scale is ratio scale. The ratio scale of measurement is interval scale of measurement, but this interval scale of measurement is also will also involve the true absolute 0 point. That means the mathematical operation of 0 will undertake the proper mathematical meaning. Let's say 0 weight, 0 height, 0 distance. That means the 0 will have proper null mathematical meaning. In such case, we might undertake opt ratio scale. For this ratio scale, it's possible to undertake mathematical operations. For instance, how much is the average age of individual? How much is the average weight of individual? How much the average? How much is the minimum? How much is the maximum? How much is the variation? A kind of this specific mathematical analysis might be made. Mathematical operations are possible for both ratio as well as interval. Because of this, you'll find on recent softwares, both of them are scale. Therefore, the distinction between the code is quite easy. Variables, if it is categorical, automatically it is either nominal or it is ordinal. If it is not categorical, if it is in number, it is scale, because be it ratio, be it interval, it will involve mathematical operations. That was actually the case, and then you also need to would be quite good if we also use the softwares, but the problem is the course syllabus not just included these softwares, and it's quite also unmanageable to just also include and then to show these softwares by taking some data. That was quite difficult. Yes, that was the case. Therefore, you also need to properly define the measurement scale. And then so far the discussion is on data processing management. And then let me also just give you a chance And then after having some specific discussions on it, I will proceed to the second part of data problems and then weld. Then you may actually raise pointers which is not clear. Yes? You may raise hands. Do you have any point on our previous discussion? If so, let me give you some chance. Otherwise, I'll proceed to the remaining part. Mohammed.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
okay.
I think this data processing techniques are like somehow not clear. So I also agree if it is repeated in a language like Amharic, so that we can understand it very well.
About the
So
internet problem?
The internet is good, no problem with me.
Okay. You see, the problem is this is supposed to be actually given along with the software. And then if so, it might be quite clear. The assumption of the course is as if you have already have an understanding about data processing and management, or understanding about an exposure to either of these softwares, like SPSS or Stata. The problem is the student, they don't have actually maybe limited understanding. I also just guess some of the students, they also have ample experience of working on these maybe softwares. I'm sure for those individuals who have already just an exposure, it might be quite clear. But the problem is the course syllabus will actually start as if starting from individual who have already understanding about this software's background. That was the case. And then it might be quite easy to also show using these softwares, but the problem is it is quite difficult to include those softwares illustrations on this 2-credit-hour course. And then I also just started at the beginning class just to supplement the gap, and then usually they actually need to maybe complement these specific limitations through providing the computer maybe short-term training in different time. That was my suggestions. In due time, you might also ask your school to have separate maybe short-term training on these softwares. Otherwise, that was a problem, you see. Otherwise, it is quite need to be clear. Then I will also just a bit slower, maybe subsequently, just to explain the issues. You see, this one is quite very important part. And the undertaking analysis is almost, for some of students, it will take about maybe a year. And then this is the main reason for why the students are not properly completing their thesis on time. Because after just completing the coursework, they actually get in trouble while undertaking analysis because of limitations of certain skills. And then I also just expect this, and the problem is the issue that we are just discussing is somewhat practical. It needs actual maybe data, and then it might be quite easy if you actually take certain questionnaires and then define right away and then giving some illustrations, and then a kind of those discussions is also expected from the course. But the problem is that was not actually given a credit for the course. I don't know why the reason might be the case. That was the case. And then maybe before proceeding, let me give chance for themselves. Shetu?
This chapter, I think we are trying to discuss about data analysis, I think.
Yes.
Yes, doctor.
Yeah.
Okay. In data analysis. Okay. In data analysis, can you use only software or by other means we can interpret data? For example, we prepare open-ended questionnaires to our respondents. Then we collect that questionnaires from respondents and we interpret using percentage, I think.
Yeah. We
So,
expect all the questions need to be actually processed by the software. That was the case. Yes. Yeah. We expect particularly, be it open, be it closed-ended questions, we expect to undertake analysis using software.
only using software?
Yeah, that was the case. It might be maybe the easiest software which is recommended for posting primary questionnaire is Spaces, and we expect to undertake analysis using these softwares. That was the point. Let me actually proceed to the remaining part. Those of you who didn't just maybe mute your, please mute your, please mute your.
Hello, doctor.
Yeah. Yes.
Can I repeat by Amharic? Okay. For
Yeah, you can do that.
example, አሁን የኛ ታይትላችን ወይም የሪሰርቻችን ርዕስ አሰስመንት ቢሆንና የምንጠቀመው ግን አሁን ኦፕን-ኢንድ አድርገን ያን ካደረግን በኋላ ፐርሰንቴጅ ተጠቅመን ዳታችንን ኢንተርፕሬት ማድረግ አንችልም ወይ? ኢንስቴድ ኦፍ ዩዚንግ ሶፍትዌርስ ማለት ነው።
በሶፍትዌር መስራቱ የተሻለ አድቫንቴጅ አለው። በቀላሉ ፕሮሰስ ማድረግ ያስችላል። ስራውም የተሻለ ጥሩ ስራ ይሆናል። yes ምክንያቱም የምትጠይቀው መጠይቅ ብዙ ነው። ከመቶ በላይ ያለ መጠይቅ ለመመለስ ስፔሲፊካሊ በታሊ ኦልድ ሜተድስ መጠቀም አይጠበቅም እና በተጨማሪም ደግሞ አድቫንስድ ስታቲስቲካል ቴክኒክስ ቱሎችን ለመጠቀም አያስችልም። ስለዚህ we expect all students to use these softwares. The problem is it must also be just supplied along with maybe this training, and if so it will supplement much. That was the point. Yes, let me actually proceed to the remaining part, and then I will also give you the second chance. The second part is immediately after while actually undertaking data processing and management, the certain problem issues might also be rising, and then this might also be just discussed in this part. The first part is what are the most commonly data problems that you will face in research, and then what is the way out. That was the case. Primarily, once if you also have maybe an exposure to the softwares, there are specific mechanisms by which you will detect the common data problems. You see, if data problems will not be actually corrected, and then it's not possible to undertake proper analysis. What to do, particularly for instance, missing data. Missing data might be if you actually not properly collect data. That is the case, yes? Or what will happen, for instance, if you have missing variables. Certain specifications might be also just answered, and then what will happen if you miss certain variables. And then there are also common data problems, might be distribution outlier. And then there are suggested statistical way out for this. I will actually discuss those issues in this part. And then that was actually the case in which still the assumption is you have already attempted to use these softwares, or you are almost in the process of data entry and management. That was the assumption. One step is already just jumped. That was the case. Data could be analyzed using different variety ways, and it should also be just properly inserted using different softwares, even including Excel. Typically, the Excel sheet is almost similar, or maybe quite analytically similar with the data entry formats of SPSS, data entry format of Stata. Almost it seems Excel, and you will insert data on those data entry windows, and then while actually inserting data, you will actually face certain specific problematic data issues. And these problematic data issues need to also be detected. The first one is how to actually detect these data problems. That was the case. The first way, just to look at particularly the whole windows, yes, and checking out maybe the data and jump it, and all those might be the case, or checking the windows and then observing maybe wrongly inputted data. You must simply maybe identify by simply detecting. This is quite difficult, but the softwares, particularly the SPSS softwares, have their own specific techniques for detecting data problems. And then there are specific windows for which it will actually identify the common data problems. And you will also identify the common data problems, and then from all these common data problems, particularly these are the three different common data problems that you will actually apparently faced by researchers while undertaking analysis in the SPSS are the three. The first one is missing data. Second one is distribution outlier. Third one is data inconsistency. These are the three main data problems. For instance, in the questionnaire, you also need to check the response of respondent. For instance, if the daughter age is greater than mother age, and this is quite inconsistency, yes? And then this is data inconsistency. That means simply, this should not be the case if you have an equations of mother age, and then subsequently, if you also have an equations of daughter age, by no means daughter age should greater than mother's age. And this is wrong information. Therefore, such kind of data inconsistency need to be trimmed out while while you are just undertaking data entry. You have to actually understand properly the data before properly inserted into computers. For instance, if the employee salary is less than the minimum wage, that was the case. Negative value for certain expected result. For instance, negative value for age or negative value for income, and then these are almost out of expectation. That was quite difficult. In fact, detecting these data inconsistencies needs clear understanding, critical understanding about the questions, detailed understanding about the questions on the part of researchers. Data processing and analysis might also involve data cleaning, coding, data entry, data analysis. That was already just addressed at the beginning, but the missing data is quite straightforward, particularly detecting missing data, and this software is quite easy. Even the computer will also give you maybe maybe data. Right away, you might simply select, scroll those which is not maybe inserted data. That is easy. But the problem is the computer will not identify data inconsistencies. An example that was already just made. That was, it needs logical thinking that is expected to be made by the researchers. I said this missing data will not have any solutions on the part of the researchers. Missing data, if the researchers miss the whole data, the possible solution is just you need to actually collect those data again. That was what we expect. But in some of the case, particularly when the researchers face maybe difficulties for specific missing of specific variables, there might also be just certain statistical solutions. Simply, you might need to maybe insert by certain average variables, or you might need to insert by mode or media. That is the point. Dealing with distributional outlier, it is also the case. Distributional outlier is very extreme large or very extreme low observations and than the actual expected observations because of different reasons. For instance, while setting age, in place of 80, we just simply clicked and then added 10, which is 80. And then we actually supposed to insert a data of 80 age, but we just actually inserted 800 by simply adding 10. And then in such case, and then the age of individual should not be exceeding 100. And then if it is 800, it is outlier, very extreme large observations. Or while inserting age, let's say for instance 5, and then 5 and then 1, and then in place of 5, 1, if we didn't just insert properly 1, and then the age might be 5, and then imagine the age of individual or the age of household will not be also 5, and then this distribution outlier is very ungenuine, very low or very high observations on the data. Unexpected data observations might be the case. And then these problems particularly will be checked using the softwares. That was the way out. Easily, and it's been if we are actually using the software, it is quite easy to check and then trace out those specific problems. The last point of this chapter is the discussions on techniques of data analysis. And then basically, after actually undertaking and then completing all the required steps on data processing management on this software, and the next step is just undertaking analysis. And then what are the techniques, particularly, which is quite available for undertaking analysis for research. And then I will also just briefly explain certain different types of analysis. And then for your simple, quick memory, and then in fact, this chapter is also assumes as if you have solid, maybe previous understanding about basic statistical knowledge. And if not, try to also read certain basic statistical theories related to this part. But I will mention those statistical techniques for undertaking analysis. The first one is descriptive statistical techniques. And then the descriptive statistical techniques might be graph. You might undertake different types of plots to actually show pattern, graph, pattern, chart. Pattern might be observed by observing this, by using line chart might be the case. You might also quite interested to explain maybe the value. It might also be depicted by histogram, bar chart, pie chart. There are different types of graphs. By the way, while describing your data, describing using figure might actually will not actually need much elaborations. If it's undertaken, if you actually describe by table, then it needs much discussions. But the graph and figures will not actually need much discussion because of this. The first descriptive statistics, in fact, it's quite simple, but it is quite important. And then mostly these graph figures might be applied for categorical observations, probably for explaining frequencies percentage. Measure of dispersion, and before that, measure of central tendency, SASIX. The measure of central SASIX tendencies, measure of central tendency is SASIX that will actually explain to what extent the total observation is just falling to central main observation. And this, to this end, this is the common, widely used central statistical central tendency SASIX metrics are mean, that is average, mode, media. Measure of variations, to what extent the overall observation is just vary from central observation is also the case. Measure of dispersion, disparity, primarily coefficient of variation, standard deviation, range, and undertaking minimum, maximum might be actually fixed. And above all, we might also need to apply inferential statistical techniques. The inferential statistical techniques are techniques that will actually employ the 10 tests. And then t-test might be actually requiring f-test, chi-square test, and undertaking might be correlation, regression analysis might be the case. Except simply mentioning and how to use and then directing how to use each will not actually discuss much. The only suggestion I have particularly to explore, I suggest all of you just to explore detail about these techniques. Like for instance, how to use this chi-square test. Chi-square test might be actually used particularly to compare the association between two or more categories at a time. Actually, to statistically test whether the correlation between or maybe the relationship between two specific categories. For instance, one category might be age, might be education, the other is sex. And then will it be actually have any systematic relation between sex versus educations? And then if so, if education is measured in category and sex is also measured in category, and then you will undertake chi-square test. T-test might also be applied, particularly for measuring, checking the maybe statistical significant difference of mean between two categories. Like let's say for instance, income, and then is there any statistical difference between male to female? This might be answered using t-test. And then if it is more than maybe two categories at a time for continuous variables, f-test might be applied. And then these are most, the techniques particularly need to be elaborated, and then would be also quite good if I just take certain data and then elaborate. The problem is the course will not actually have such specific details. And then in fact, it needs to add, to undertake, to include those softwares and then deal those issues. It must also be just, the course must also be should also be offered by Secretary. Second one is, second pressure statistical method is the use of correlation analysis and regression analysis. For your quick memory, the distinction between correlation versus regression analysis, both of them, they are actually measuring the relation between variables. The relation between variable X with Y. Let's say, for instance, is there a relation between maybe blood pressure of individuals versus age of individuals? That means we expect as the age of individuals is rising, we expect there might be having blood pressure. That means there is a positive correlation. That means the correlation simply shows the extent and degree of association between variables. In this case, to what extent age is correlated with blood pressure. But regression, apart from showing the relationship, it will also show the cause and effect relationships. In this case, of using the same example, blood pressures might be occurring because of age. That means as we keep on as the age of individuals rising, we expect there is high tendency of high blood pressure. The cause is now age, the effect is blood pressure. And then to what extent, how much increment in age might lead to influence BP will also be explained in detail by using parameters, regression analysis. This regression analysis will also have distinction between variables, dependent effect variables and dependent cause variables. And this regression will also have different specific categories like simple linear regression model, multiple linear regression models. And then the covariates might be the case. Do you think the blood pressure of individuals might be occur because of age? Not, because of different reasons. Because of, let's say, weight, or because of other factors might also influencing the case. Therefore, it's also possible to include other covariates just influencing the Y variables might also be implied by regression analysis. The most common widely used techniques of correlation analysis just for depicting the relation between variables are for which you will find in these softwares are Spearman rank correlation coefficient, Spearman correlation coefficient. Spearman rank correlation coefficient and Pearson correlation coefficient. In fact, both of them are a method for measuring the correlation between variables, but this Spearman and Pearson correlation coefficient might be used for categorical Spearman. For categorical, yes, Spearman, and then Pearson might also be applied for continuous variables. That was the case. The choice might also be just depending on the type of measurement as well. That was a point. I also just expect this chapter is quite a bit maybe strong to understand, and it would also require you to explore more for maybe understanding depths about all issues. And then I also just encourage you to also maybe to take some certain short-term training on these softwares, and so that these chapters might be easy and you will apply to your tests as well. And the last is mental gymnastics that was actually meant to initiate you to read your textbook. And that was the case. And then let me give you again chance to elaborate certain point. You may actually made your point. Thank you. If you want to actually raise questions, you may make on the discussion that we had today. If it is not clear to you, you may raise a question, and then we'll make the discussions. Is that clear?
Hello.
This one is, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, okay. Use that.
What is the main difference between the analysis and a process? Data processing and data analysis. What's the difference?
Data analysis and data processing. You see, data processing and analysis. That was data processing management. Immediately after completing your field work, you need to back to you. You will actually have collected primary data. Yes, those primary data need to be inserted on the computer, and then for which first you have to define the variable, and then again you have to assure the proper definitions of code must also be inserted on the maybe properly on the computer. Data entry, data processing will include data definition, data editing, data entry, and then analysis. And that is the processes are almost will not be actually carried out in one day. Yes, you have to actually involve about 4 specific steps, and then after that you will undertake your analysis. Analysis might be actually undertaking simple descriptive statistics. It might be figure might be inferential statistical techniques, or undertaking maybe analysis using correlation, undertaking analysis using regressions. That is the case, yes. You see, therefore analysis is just the end, but process is just, it will start from data definitions up to data entry. That was the case.
Analysis is more mathematical use, like correlation.
And analysis is just simply reporting the result mathematically, yes. You actually need to apply in analysis like regression. You will also apply correlation
like that.
And then
statistical methods, yeah.
But the previous one is a process, yes.
The process, the data collection, data presentation, like this. Thank you.
ይሄ part specifically ከፊልድ አሁን ለምሳሌ አንድ ሪሰርች ፕሮፖዝ ባደረጋችሁ ሪሰርች ላይ ዳታ ሰበሰባችሁ። ለምሳሌ አንድ ተቋም ላይ የ100 መጠይቅ ሰበሰብ 100 መጠይቅ አስሞላን። ከዛ 100 መጠይቅ አስሞልተን ከተመለስን በኋላ ዳይሬክትሊ እሱን ወደ አናሊሲስ ወደ ስታቲስቲካል ፊገር መቀየር አንችልም። ወደ ስታቲስቲካል ፊገር ሲምፕል ዲስክሪፕቲቭ ስታቲስቲክስ ወይ ኢንፈረንሻል ስታቲስቲካል ቴክኒክስ ወይም ኮሪሌሽን ሪግሬሽን ሰርተን ሪፖርትን ጀነሬት ማድረግ አንችልም። ከዛ በፊት ይልቁኑ ምን ይፈልጋል? እያንዳንዱ የመጀመሪያውን አንዷን መጠይቅ ለኮምፒውተሩ ማስተዋወቅ ይፈልጋል። you have to actually define የመጀመሪያው ቫሪያብል ምንድነው? ምክንያቱም የኮምፒውተር ላንጉዌጅ ቁጥር ነው ይያል እያንዳንዱ ቁጥር ነው እሱ የሚረዳው። ስለዚህ ፕሮፐርሊ የመጠይቁን በቁጥር በለዚህ ለስፔሲስ ሶፍትዌርስ ዲፋይን ማድረግ ነው የመጀመሪያው ስቴፕ። ዲፋይን ማድረግ ብዙ ነገር ያካትታል። በትክክል ሌብል ማድረግ፣ ሜዠርመንት ስኬሉን ፕሮፐርሊ አሳይን ማድረግ፣ then ኮዱን በትክክል መስጠት። ይሄን ከጨረስን በኋላ ኢሚዲየትሊ ደግሞ አሁንም ስፔሲፊካሊ የመጀመሪያው መጠይቅ ወደ ኮምፒውተሩ ማስገባት ይፈልጋል። የመጀመሪያው መልስ፣ ሁለተኛው መልስ፣ ሶስተኛው መልስ፣ የ120ው መልስ እንደዛው ወደ ኮምፒውተሩ ይገባል። ከገባም በኋላ ደግሞ ስፔሲፊካሊ ኮመን ፕሮብሌሞች ያጋጥማሉ ብያለሁ ቅድም አንስተናል። የተለያዩ ፕሮብሌሞች አሉ። እነዛም ዴታ ፕሮብሌሞችን ሚኒማይዝ፣ ምክንያቱም እነዛ አይነት ለምሳሌ ሚሲንግ ኦብዘርቬሽን ያለው ወይም ደግሞ አውት ኦፍ ሬንጅ ያለው ቢገባ በአናሊሲስ ሪፖርቱ ላይ ከፍተኛ አስተዋጽኦ ኔጌቲቭ ኢፌክት ያመጣል። ስለዚህ that must be actually edited። ያ ካለቀ ይሄ ፕሮሰስ ካለቀ በኋላ ነው አናሊሲስ ሪዛልት የሚወጣው። ይሄ አናሊሲስ ለመስራት ስታቲስቲካል ቤዚክ ስታቲስቲካል ቲዮሪ ያስፈልጋል ብለናል። ያስፈልጋል ስፔሲፊካሊ እነዚህ ቀደም ብለን የተማርናቸው ናቸው። አሁን ኤግዞስቲቭሊ ሜንሊ ያልኩባቸው የአናሊሲስ ቴክኒኮች የሉ፣ ግን በምን መልኩ እንዴት ልጠቀም የሚባለው ጉዳይ ነው። ስለዚህ ብሪፍሊ ኪን ሰፋ አድርጎ ማየት ይጠብቃል። እንዳልኩት ኮርሱንም ሲጀምር ይሄ ከሶፍትዌሩ ጋር አብሮ ተያይዞ አሁን ይሄንን አንብባችሁት ሰብስኩዌንትሊ ደግሞ ሶፍትዌር ላይ አብሮ እንሰራ የተሻለ ይሆን ነበር። ያን ማድረግ አልቻለም፣ ግን በሾርት ተርም ትሬኒንግ አይ ቲንክ እንደሚሰጥ ተነጋግረናል ከስኩል ጋር። that is the point. any other point እንጂ ግልጽ 100% እዚሁ ዲስከስ እንደማደርግላችሁ ግልጽም ላይሆን የሚችልበት ሁኔታዎች ይኖራሉ። አም ሹር ደግሞ በዚህ ላይ የሰራችሁ ልጆች ቀደሞ የነበራችሁ ኢንት ያላችሁ ልጆች it is quite clear to you already በውስጡ ስላለፋችሁ።
Thank you, sir.
Okay, ተጨማሪ ሌላ any other point? ተጨማሪ ጥያቄ ካለ ስለዚህ ይሄንን
እነዚህ ሪግሬሽን እና ኮሪሌሽን እያልን ያልናቸው ማቴማቲካል ዘዴዎች አሉ። እንጠቀምባቸው ስታቲስቲካል ሜተድ ብለን ያልናቸው ወደ ግራፍ ወደ ምን እናመጣቸውና ሁሉንም ግዴታ በአንድ ሪሰርች ውስጥ ሁሉም ነው የምንጠቀመው ወይስ በየሪሰርቹ የሚለያያል? ሳይንቲፊክ ሪሰርች
እንደ ሪሰርች ኦብጀክቲቭ ይለያል። የሪሰርች ኦብጀክቲቭ የሪሰርች የምትሰራው የሪሰርች ኦብጀክቲቭ ነው የሚወስነው take tools of analysis in some of the case only you might apply simple descriptive statistics you might not need to involve advanced statistical techniques FTST test correlation regression ሳያስፈልግ ሊመለስ የሚችል አይነት ሪሰርች ሊኖር ይችላል የሪሰርች ኦብጀክቲቭ ይወስናል ደግሞ ሪሰርች ኦብጀክቲቭ ደግሞ ስፔሲፊካሊ ዳይሬክትሊ ሪግሬሽን ደግሞ የሚፈልግ ደግሞ ይኖራል በዛ ጊዜ you have to actually identify understand አሁን regression analysis correlation ለምን ያገለግላል እንጂ ስፔሲፊካሊ depthly አላየነው ምስ
አላየነው ልክ ነው
እሱ በደንብ depthly ራሱን የቻለ ኮርስ ስለሆነ ነው ነገር ግን
ያ ስታቲስቲክስ ላይ የተወሰነ ነገር ስላየ ነው
አይታችሁታል
ያ ስታቲስቲክስ ላይ መጀመሪያ ዲግሪ ላይ ስታቲስቲክስ ስላለ
እዛ ላይ ከሆነ በትክክል ግልጽ ይሆናል እንደዚህ አይነት አንደርስታንዲንጋችሁ ኦሬዲ ኤክስፕሎር እንድታደርጉ ነው የሚፈልገው
እና ግን በተለያየ ሪሰርች የተለያየ ሜቶዶች መጠቀም ግዴታ ይለያያል ማለት ነው
ይለያያል it is just in line with your research objectives ነው እነዚህ ሜቶዶች accordingly ልትጠቀሟቸው yes that is the case እንጂ it's not mandatory to use all ነገር ግን በሚደንቅ ሁኔታ ከነዚህ አንዱን ወይ ሁለት ሶስቱን ተጠቅማችሁ አናሊሲስ ትሰራላችሁ እንጂ ይሄን ሳይጠቀም ደግሞ አናሊሲስ መስራት አይቻልም ይሄን ሳይጠቀም ደግሞ የትኛውም ተማሪ አይመረቅም እንደማለት ነው you have to know certain specific አንዱን የትኛው እንደሆነ አይታወቅም እንጂ አንድ ሁለቱን መጠቀም ይቻላል actually next chapter I will actually give you some additional task for which you will also observe how students are using these techniques for their analysis yes how students are just using these techniques for answering their research in million report writing part so far the discussion almost three consecutive chapter is spent on research methodology part if methodology is clear and then the remaining will not be actually quite difficult I also give maybe any additional chance if you have you want to raise point question no one it's clear
yes
okay
yes.
if so see you I will share you this material to Grandma Mogos and then see you next
ልዩነት መፍጠር ዓላማችን ነው ዓለም አቀፍ ተወዳዳሪ መሆን አለባችሁ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ ጥራትና ደረጃውን የጠበቀ ስልጠና በመስጠት ብቁ ዜጋ ያፈራን ነው በፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን በበረራ መስተንግዶ በቲኬቲንግና ሪዘርቬሽን በሆቴልና ቱሪዝም ሙያዎች አሰልጥነን ተወዳዳሪ እናደርጉታለን ኮሌጃችን ካናዳ ከሚገኘው ኢንተርናሽናል ኤር ትራንስፖርት አሶሲዬሽን አያታና ከእንግሊዙ ICM ጋር በመተባበር ዓለም አቀፍ ዕውቅና ያለው ስልጠና እየሰጠ ይገኛል በፍላይት ኦፕሬሽን በበረራ መስተንግዶ የምንሰጣቸው ስልጠና ከኢትዮጵያ ሲቪል አቪዬሽን ባለስልጣን ሙሉ ዕውቅና አለው አድራሻ ከጎላጉል ታወር 22 አደባባይ ወደ ሾላ በሚወስደው መንገድ ላይ የናሽናል ኤርዌይስ እህት ኩባንያ ናሽናል አቪዬሽን ኮሌጅ ህልሞን